And I think a lot of different artists find that the only way you kind of move past emotions that can maybe be so painful and events that can maybe be so painful is turning them into something that you can look at and be like, well, at least this is beautiful.
My name is Wes Gibbons, and welcome back to the Tungsten Originals podcast. You just heard part of a conversation with writer and director Nicole Barley. We discussed our collaboration on her upcoming short film, Lighthouse Keeping, how we think the film industry should improve, and the tangible impact of women-led film sets. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Episode 64 of the Tungsten Originals podcast. Nicole, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Woo, I'm doing good. Had a lot of coffee, so I'm ready.
Perfect. I'm just going to start sending the guests wherever they are. I'm just going to Uber Eats them a ton of coffee so we can just start on a high and then we'll plummet as the episode goes on.
We're just cracked out the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Nicole, this is really exciting. You are a fantastic writer and director, and Tungsten is currently helping out on your next short film called Lighthouse Keeping. And I definitely want to talk about that and your other shorts and, you know, all the amazing stuff that you made so far. But before we get into all that, I want to go back to the beginning and find out how you got into all of this. I know you're from Florida, but I don't really know how you started filmmaking in general. So where does this all begin for you?
Yeah, so when I was growing up in Florida, I was a theater kid big time. And I started from like a very young age. I think like 4 years old, I started doing kind of the like Christmas pageants at church.
Right.
And then I graduated from that to doing local theater. And where I grew up, we actually have a really nice theater program, like just in the city. We have one of those theaters where like Broadway tours will come and perform. And so a lot of good opportunities for acting on the stage. And I did that for about 15 years. And I applied to SCAD as performing arts. And so my first 2 quarters at SCAD, I was a performing arts major. And up until that point, I had never really delved into the film world, never really understood it or was even like really given an opportunity to see what it looks like until I went to SCAD. And I was able to, the first thing that I acted in was a little like proof of concept thing. And I was able to see everyone do the behind the scenes work, direct that whole mess that happens. And I loved it. And I just had a burning passion to do that instead. At the time, I was like really burnt out from having acted basically my entire life. And while I do, like, I still love it, filmmaking and like seeing that side of that world, the behind the camera side, was so interesting to me when I first discovered it, that the passion was so large that I just went full force with it. I didn't switch my major though until my 3rd quarter of my freshman year. So I really only did about, I think 3 or 4 quarters of like film classes or officially being a film major, because I am no longer in school. So I'm no longer studying filmmaking, but that is where that sort of like passion stemmed from, was just getting the opportunity to see what it was like to be a filmmaker and realize that it was something I wanted to do, because as an actor, you don't have that much creative influence in terms of like actual content that's being made. You're given a script and you can put as much, you know, of your own spin on whatever it is that you're making, but you don't have any sort of like actual, you know, creative direction in it or things like that. And so getting to see that that's even an option for me was huge and really spurred the switch from performing arts to film.
Did you ever consider doing like acting and directing or acting and producing? Because there are a lot of like Brad Pitt has Plan B Productions, you know, like a huge production company that he finances stuff, but he is of course also an actor. So Was that ever an interest, like still doing the acting side, or you just wanted to like full force go into the behind the camera stuff?
I think when I first switched over, it was more so that I had been acting for so long that I didn't have as much of the passion to continue doing it fully as compared to, this bright, shiny new film thing. And so I definitely wasn't, I was still doing acting things on the side. There's a couple of things that I acted in just for friends while I was at SCAD.
Hmm.
And I do still see myself doing acting further down the road, but it also
Mm.
became a whole thing where it logistically, it's hard to make it as a performer and just kind of
Yeah.
stay afloat financially. And I think we're similar people in the sense that like we're very creative people, but we also like to think about things as like from a very logistical standpoint as well as like
Totally.
I need to feed myself, I need to like do all these things. So you
Yeah.
need to do what you have to do. And with
Right.
performing arts and acting, it's so much harder. It's
Hmm.
a lot easier to have a well-paying job in film than it is to be an actor or an actress. So the plan essentially, I guess in the back of my mind, I don't really like, I don't know, navigate it in order to achieve this plan. But I would love to, make a living doing film. And therefore, because I would be financially stable enough, be able to like audition in free time. I didn't want to
Hmm.
like depend my entire financial income on getting roles. It just was
Yeah.
the idea of it was very, very stressful to me. And filmmaking
Yeah.
in general is so stressful, but just that living a life like that to me was so anxiety ridden that I wanted something like a little bit more stable, I think.
I think that is like not talked about enough, is that realization of like we go from, I say we, I should talk about myself. You go from, I went from being like this bright-eyed bushy-tailed teenager who wanted to make stuff, and like you are still that way in college where like the world is your oyster and you're going to change the world and everything. And that's like you should think that, like, because, and people should continue to think that as long as they can. But then you get close to graduation, you're like, oh, I have to pay for things. And obviously there are people that are actors and are financially stable, and like there's thousands of those people, millions if not, like a lot of people are able to do that and it is attainable, but it is a harrowing thing to think about, like having to support yourself, but you still need that creative agency. I know you and I have talked a lot about wherever we work, we know we're not going to have our dream job right away, but we need some kind of creative agency. We want to help in the making of something. Um, but that can be kind of hard to reckon with, Yeah. So I know that you're a fantastic screenwriter, and I think there are a lot of people that are like writers and directors. There are some people that are more writers than they are directors. Some people that are mostly directing, but you're one of those people that I know through SCAD that I think about, like she is like a writer. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just love your writing so much. I of course read your Lighthouse Keeping script and loved it. So I did some research. I listened to some other interviews that you did. From what I understand, you've been writing for basically forever, right?
Yeah, so it's always been my like favorite subject in school. Even when it was
Hmm.
just kind of like intellectual writings of just essays that we had to do, as a requirement for classes. I liked writing them. It was never
Hmm.
a burden for me. And I was always just that kid that would write short stories in like notebooks and tell myself at like the age of 10 that I was going to release a novel. And then obviously that's not gonna, I still have the writings like in leather bound books and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which is like looking back on it, it's absolute nonsense. But from a very young age, I was kind of coming up with these like imaginative stories. And as time went on, I became really, really interested in poetry. And that has been a really big outlet for me. And I think it's super, at least important to me when it comes to translating my writing to scripts. Because when I've had people read my screenplays, this goes for like professors as well. the biggest takeaway that people tell me is that the action and some of the word choices are like way more descriptive than most screenplays are. And I've found that like a lot of the way that I write in poetry, which is super, super romanticized writing, translates to screenplays. Um, and I think that's kind of just the way that my writing has morphed. I enjoy that system that I've created of kind of like I like to think of the idea, write it super, super abstractly, normally in poetry form, and then kind of shift into how do you make this an actionable thing? How do you translate this into actual blocking? Um, but yeah, I've always loved writing. It's always been a huge part of me. It just was never ever something that I capitalized on or even was something that I thought that I could make a living out of. Um, but having gone into film and kind of establishing myself as a director, I think it's a lot easier to kind of morph the two, like writer and director together, um, and just come up with your own ideas. So it's definitely been a very new thing for me to actually take creative agency over my writing and have the idea that I can actually use my writing for a career and turn it into something rather than just letting it sit around in notebooks. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what I think is interesting and why I respect you and the other talented screenwriters that I know so much is that like you're able to both write and direct your own things, like write something that you know that you will be in charge of, but also write scripts for other people and kind of pass that along. And writing, no matter what you could be talking about yourself or not, but like that's a very vulnerable thing to do. You're really putting yourself out there in a similar way in which the director is. So how do you approach scripts differently, like Roots in Lighthousekeeping, which from the beginning you're going to be the director, versus scripts that you have worked with other filmmakers on and that you aren't going to be the one necessarily calling the shots?
I think it's definitely a line that I've had to walk, and I'm still kind of navigating it because sometimes when I write scripts for other people, I do find myself putting things in the script that I know that if I was the director, I would block these characters in a certain way, but that doesn't mean that that director is going to, receive the script in that way and want to do the exact same thing. And so a lot of the time it's been like having to navigate this process of omitting things from the script as well, where I'll go back and read it and be like, that's the director stepping in. That's me thinking what I would make these characters do, but it's not necessarily what this person, is going to eventually do for their own characters. And you don't want to give someone a script with, your preconceived blocking of how it should go, because that's taking away their creative agency. So it's definitely a fine line. I think it's something that I would hope a lot of screenwriters deal with, because I definitely have, or I guess writer directors. I think when you have a concept or idea that you're writing, a lot of the times, at least from my perspective, I get so passionate about it, regardless of whether it's a concept that I came up with, like if it was just given to me by someone. If I'm writing the script, I care about these characters and I care about what I'm writing about, that the director in me kind of like gets protective over it almost. And so I find myself imagining how I would direct it myself. But obviously, when it comes down to it, you kind of create this piece that it's kind of a hard process, actually. You create this piece that you have this emotional connection to, and it's like giving a baby to someone else. And
yeah,
you're just
exactly.
Like, well, do what you must with him.
That's what I wanted to touch on, is because like I feel like if someone hired me, quote unquote hired me, and they were like, write a script about this and someone else is going to direct it, I feel like I'd get halfway through and be like, damn, I wish I was directing this.
Yeah, there was even I'm writing a script for my friend Jansen right now, who's a SCAD student. It's not his senior thesis. It's like a directing a narrative kind of thing. But he asked me to write a script, and we're we're definitely it's been a long, hard process because we both have such concrete ideas of like what
Hmm.
we want to do, and
And you both
because
are directors as well.
yes, which is a
Yeah.
whole like even when I was writing Juliana's script, that was a whole kind of issue. Like what I was talking about when I would kind of insert my direction
Hmm.
into a script, knowing that her being the director, she was probably going to do something else. It's that walking that fine line of two directors meeting and kind of needing to tell yourself like this, although I'm writing this story, it's not really mine at the end of the day. Like I'm gonna give it up and it's gonna probably morph into something else. And that's okay. It's just needing to kind of come to terms with it. I would even say like it's almost an ego thing of your own
Yeah.
writing and kind of being able to like let it go and be like, well, I don't need like that insane creative agency over this because it's not
Hmm.
mine. It's like having to come to terms with giving up a story that you wrote, that wasn't meant for you to direct, essentially. But there's even instances where with Jansen, and we're working on a script right now, I gave him a poem that I really, really liked that I wrote. And eventually was kind of like, I actually like this so much that I actually changed my mind. I don't want to give it away in case I ever want to direct it. And so you get down like, I don't know, these different, um, or you have these different moments where you kind of fall in love with writing so much that you almost don't want to put it up for adoption, essentially. And I think a lot of
Hmm.
screenwriters feel that way. I'm curious to know because I'm obviously not old enough to be in any sort of I'm not in TV being a screenwriter. I'm curious to know what it's like to write um like episodes for TV
Right.
and just have it be like you're writing, but it truly is, just something you have to crank out and give away all the time. Like I wonder how creatively that feels.
I also wondered the same thing about directing TV because I had a professor at SCAD, Professor Sadwith, who has been on the podcast before. I think it's episode 21, maybe, if anyone wants to go listen to it. Well, that episode came out forever ago, but he has directed like episodic TV before. And I remember in class asking him about what that's like because when you come in, like Breaking Bad, for example, there's 6 seasons and you obviously can't come in like this the director, it doesn't have the same director for every episode, so a director can't come in and change everything. They can't make it look like The Office or something. Like, there is obviously a style that they need to follow, but still you're the director. And so you're still going to influence and change things. And I was asking him about that, and he said basically in that sense you're kind of a hired gun, where you're given the script and you're giving the show that has an identity and the audience is already connected to it with these certain things, and then you kind of just like, I guess, insert yourself as much as you can. But I mean that's something that I've been that I'm still learning about and watching happen like on SVU. The show has been on for 22 years. I'm on the 22nd season, and it's interesting to see how those directors handle those changes. So yeah, I do. It would be really interesting to talk to like TV writers who work in writers' rooms and just like see how much they get to influence.
Yeah, I think it eventually, because thinking of examples of things like that, at least when they bring in directors, I'm thinking of like the Harry Potter series, as cliche as that is, the Prisoner of Azkaban, which in my opinion is by far the best
It's
Harry
like a
Potter
fan
movie
favorite. Yeah. Yeah.
because it's directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and it's
Hmm.
aesthetically so different from the other ones, but it's beautiful. And
Right.
just in terms of the art, but it's the same story as the other ones, and the characters act the same, and it's like a whole cyclical thing. Like it matches up with all the other ones. It's just a striking aesthetic, and you can look at it and be like, that feels different. In my
Yeah.
opinion, it feels better than most of the other movies. But it's situations like that, I think, where you kind of have to follow a formula um, of success of whatever you're given. Just kind of like you can't stray from this because it's obviously what works um, to that extent. But you can add a little bit of spice to it, and that whatever that spice is.
Exactly. In the same way, like we hired you because you're a good director and we want to have your influence. So like it is such an interesting balancing act. But in that same way, I wonder how would you feel directing something that someone else wrote?
I don't know. I think I don't know. In my head, um, writing and directing are so, at least with my own process, so morphed together that I've never really even thought about what I would do in an instance like that, which I think is why I gravitate so much towards um, freelance work and, being hired on by an agency and kind of like being able to write your own treatments and then you get to direct. And you're not really dealing with a lot of like you're saying, the instances in which you're given a script for a successful TV show and this is stuff that's all been predetermined. You just need to come in and like figure out where the actors stand. um, to me, not having been through that, I've never directed something that wasn't my own writing, but it does in, concept form seem slightly
Mm-hmm.
stifling creatively. Um, but I do think it would be interesting to try it. I do just think that it's when I'm putting forth the effort to decide that I'm going to direct something, I want to be able to have that creative agency over the writing because in my mind they're so morphed together. So it'd be hard to separate the two, I think.
I totally agree. So I want to talk about your directorial debut. Speaking of directing, Roots is the first short film that you have written and directed. And boy, do I have to say, I wish the first thing I ever made was as good as Roots. I absolutely loved Roots. Um, I've watched it multiple times. I really connected with it, and obviously audiences did too because it got into some pretty respectable film festivals, especially Nifty, which is the what is it, the New York Film Festival for Talented Youth or North American Film Festival? What's the exact title of that?
The national,
National.
national,
Thank
national
you.
film festival. Yeah.
And it recently premiered online. So whenever you're listening to this episode, you can go into the description and watch it after this interview. I highly recommend it. But walk us through Roots, because what I really love about the Roots story, like the story of making it, and something you've talked on a lot, is that it was the first opportunity for a lot of people working on it to do the role that they want to do professionally. It was the first opportunity you had to both write and direct, the first opportunity that Dallas Jenkins had to be a DP. And what, like, I want to be able to capture that feeling on every project because you can just tell by watching the film and looking at the BTS that it was just a blast to make and everyone was kind of in their flow state creatively. So can you kind of walk us through, well, first explain to those who don't know what Roots is about and then walk us through that process.
Yeah, Roots is a story that takes place in the year 1977. So it's a period piece of sorts, at least in the very beginning, of a young deaf boy that lives off the grid and has developed this friendship with a tree in order to kind of, have companionship and a sense of community out in the middle of nowhere. And it's more so like a metaphorical statement on how important it is to feel understood and to feel heard, and how humans most of the time will go to great lengths in order to have that sense of understanding with someone else. And it, at least for me, creating Roots was kind of this weird amalgamation of making the short film. I wanted it to be something that was very me because at the time I don't think I had even switched to film at the point where I decided I was going to make Roots. I think it was like I'm going to make this and then decide if I'm going to switch. But then
Hmm.
the film ended up getting put off so much due to weather issues that I think I switched in the middle of it. Um, but I wanted it to be, this perfect encapsulation of the kind of content that I want to make because at the time I thought maybe I'll never make another short film again. And so
Mm.
what I'm making right now needs to be, something that I actually care about and something that I think, displays who I am as a creative. And so choosing to kind of have this super weird idea of a tree that can speak to someone like telepathically was a huge part of just me in terms of personality as a creative, but also the idea of bringing a community into a narrative that isn't normally at the forefront of media is kind of the um, just creative statement that I live by as a creator, bringing voices forward that aren't normally brought forward. Because I think that even being in the position to make a film is super privileged in the first place. And if you have the opportunity to share voices that wouldn't normally have the means to be shared, I think it's almost or should be a requirement of the artistic community, in my opinion. And so I wanted this kind of, mashup of these two. And it actually only came to fruition because Dallas came to me. And at that time, I think he wants to do camera operating more so now. But at the time, he wanted to be a director of photography. And he came to me and said, "Hey, I know you like to write. Can you write a script and we'll actually make it?" And it ended up being a super long process. It was like pre-production was like close to a year because we kept having it was interesting because I was so young doing it and I didn't have anything to show for what I could do. It was hard to get a crew together. And
Right.
was a huge reason as to why so much of the crew was made up of just friends and kind of like this blind trust. Not saying that I don't trust my friends to be amazing creatives, but it like none of us had anything to show for what we were capable of. So it was just kind of like, yeah, we like trust each other as humans so we can make something great. And so we put together this team of, I think it was about 40 people for this set. And we filmed it in the middle of the woods for, I think it was 3 days. However, it was put off quite a few times. I think it was pushed 3 separate times because every single shot is exterior. So anytime there was rain, we had to push it, which was a whole thing. Um, but yeah, being on set, I also wanted to capture my favorite movie of all time is Swiss Army Man, if you know it. And if you watch the behind the scenes of Swiss Army Man, it's the greatest thing in the world. It's just a bunch of friends in the middle of the woods, like making something so stupid. Like Swiss Army Man is it's a beautiful, beautiful film, and which is debatable. Some people hate it, but like metaphorically, such a beautiful film in my opinion. It's my favorite film of all time. But when you look at the behind the scenes and you see the way that they created it, it was so just like ragtag and these people that are just a bunch of friends like wanting to make something. The directors of it normally made music videos, like insane music videos. I think they did the Turn Down for What music video, and that was like the last thing they did before Swiss
Wow.
Army
I did
Man.
not know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And so they just all they had was like these like this chaotic reel of past work and these people that have worked on just like insane projects, making a feature. And so having watched that creative process, ever since then, I've just wanted to emulate it. And that was a huge thing with Roots was I just want to have all my friends in the woods and I want to make something that we all care about and we all feel like, we're having a position in which we actually have creative influence. Because obviously at that time, most of us were PAing on senior theses and things like that. So we didn't really have any sort of say or leadership in any sort of film. And so Roots was kind of just like a big rookie thing that happened, and ended up being something that I'm really proud of. And I think a lot of the crew is really proud of being able to get done.
Everyone should be proud of it because I really, really connected with it. It's one of the favorite like student short films I've ever seen. So the first day or the night before you're finally about to shoot, you've had to push back shooting days 3 times and it's taken a month of pre-production and you're about to direct a crew of 40 people for the first time ever. My first crew was 2 people. What's going through your mind?
I think I think my conscious mind took a backseat. I think I was on full,
Right.
like, just adrenaline because I already deal with such insane imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of creatives do. Um, but especially at that moment, it's kind of just like there's that many people depending on me, and taking their free time. They're not being paid because it's a student short. And so the last thing you want to do is waste people's time. And also, as a director, all eyes are on you at that moment.
Exactly.
And if you've never done it before, it's the scariest thing ever. I was terrified of what was happening. It was also like 5 in the morning when we first started shooting. So I was like sleep deprived, terrified, like starting something that I'd never done before. But at the same time, I had so many people that had my back throughout the process, which is why I think it's so important to find people that you really trust and that you know on a base level are just supportive of you no matter what. Because if you're a director, or any kind of creative and you're in a position where, if you're a director, your thoughts being out there and like your concepts and ideas, I think it's a super vulnerable position to be in regardless of what the content is. And so if you don't have people around you that, are going to make you feel like you're doing a good job regardless of whether you feel like you are or not, it's so important. And so making roots and having it's such a close relationship with Dallas and with Kenzie, and just kind of you can see in a lot of the behind the scenes videos of just like us three together and kind of, having that support network of those close friends. Kenzie being the first AD, and so like the relationship between a director, DP, and the first AD is all super important. But being able to have the relationship of like all very close friends helped a lot in terms of the imposter syndrome and just being able to, feel comfortable doing something that was so new.
Yeah, I think that mutual trust is one of the most important things, because like you can have, if you're looking at two different DPs to hire, and one you know really well and you trust with your life, but maybe they don't have as much experience as this other person that has done bigger and better things, but you've never worked with before, and they're maybe kind of an asshole. Like, I'm choosing the person that I've worked with before every time,
Mm-hmm.
because that, like, at the end of the day, if you can't work together, then it's not going to happen. Like, and there will be points, like you said, the pressure is so high. There's going to be a lot of points on set where everyone, their heads all pivot to you, and they're like, "All right, boss, what's next?" Or
Yeah.
at the final shot, you yell cut, and they're like, "All right, are we done?" And then, for me, then I run through. It feels like time stops, and I just run through this whole thing in my head of like, are we done? Do we need to do more? Blah blah blah. And so, the buck stops with you. So like having a crew that trusts you, but also you trusting your crew to carry out what they need to carry out, is so interesting, that whenever it works, and like whenever you find those situations, it's like magic, I feel like.
Yeah. And also with like the director is the director, but take away any other role and you don't have a film. So it's
Yeah, exactly.
every single position is so important. And I've been on sets myself where a director doesn't have a good relationship with other people on the set, and you normally the film can crash and burn from that point forward,
Mm-hmm.
even without like a finished product. And so if you don't have that kind of mutual respect, which in my opinion, and we've talked about this before, like off screen should be bare minimum of
Yeah,
filmmaking, is like respecting the people you work with. But if you don't have that, it's like not it's not conducive to any sort of like great finished product, in my
mm-hmm.
opinion. And also, even if the finished product ends up being good, I think that the people involved deserve to have good emotions towards something they worked on as
Totally.
well. You want to have a good network of people that actually want to uplift a film rather than be like, oh, that was absolute hell to work on.
Yeah.
And therefore, like, I don't care if it succeeds. You want to have the people around you, you know, recognizing that they had a good time and it was worth the effort to make the film.
Right. Because especially at our level when we're not paying people yet,
Yeah.
people are giving us their time. And that's the one resource that none of us can get back. So I have such a fear and anxiety of someone working on my film and then it's over and they're like, ugh, I hated that experience. And I don't think that's happened so far, knock on wood. But that is definitely something that I think about is like how do you make it worth each other's times? Because you always want people who are going to latch on to the idea as much as you. Like with Roots, obviously Dallas cared about the story. Obviously Demi and Jenna, the DP and production designer respectively for Lighthouse Keeping, which we'll get to in a second, obviously they care about the story because they wouldn't be doing it. But at the end of the day, everyone is there because of you, because of the writer and director. And if so you're the one that is like kind of benefiting most from that experience. So making sure that they are comfortable and like happy and getting to input what they can input, I think is super important. And a director I think that really emphasizes this is Olivia Wilde. Like she just wrapped a film. I don't know what it's called or even what it's about. But she posted on her Instagram story or on her Instagram, like, look at these PAs. We couldn't have done it without them. And like, I know that that's a small gesture, but as a PA, that
Yeah.
felt so good to see that like there are still highly successful directors that like understand that, you know?
Yeah, and it's hard to, I don't know. I was talking to someone else about this recently, and we've talked a lot about it as well, just kind of because we're both in the doing the PA gigs. And that's hard. And I don't think people really even talk about that in film school, like how actually physically draining it is, and
Yeah.
how just the mental gymnastics you go through of like waking up in the morning and going to go do it because you know that in the future, hopefully, it'll benefit you and get you to where you want to be. But having the difference between a crew that treats you kindly and a crew that treats you not kindly is like, at least from a PA's position, like your entire mental health. And I think recognizing that as, and I think both of us as we, move up, as time goes on in the film world, I think we'll carry that with us of just kind of like the mutual respect is so important, and kind of creating this world where the norm is kindness instead of this sort of like abrasive meanness and harshness that exists in the film world from past generations. Not saying it's their fault. I think it's something that's been carried on just culturally.
Hmm.
But I do think that us as a generation is slowly, accepting the fact that it doesn't need to be that way. And it actually helps to create something a lot better when you have people on a crew who want to wake up at 4 in the morning and work
Yeah.
on it
And go
because
work
they know
12
the
to 14
people.
hours.
Exactly, because they know the people there care about them. That difference between like if you feel cared for or not is so, so huge in film.
And one of the pillars of like why tungsten exists is to usher in a more fair and just industry, and that has to deal a lot with like diversity and the stories we're telling and the people on crews that we're using to tell those stories. But also, it has to deal with just treating people nice, and that is something that like a lot of our peers are in our similar position of doing the PA grunt work and moving up the ladder. And I respect those people a lot because I
Mhm.
understand firsthand how difficult it is. Um, and that's just gotta, that's one thing that like I think about a lot whenever hopefully Tungsten is like a big company and doing big things that I'm never going to forget that I was a PA waking up at 4 a.m. to do an hour commute each way to go work 12 to 14 hours minimum wage. Like that will always be with me because
Mhm.
I never want to lose like that humbleness. Not that I'm assuming that I'm going to be like some crazy big successful person, but like I don't know. I sometimes I'll see stuff and I want to be like, you started somewhere too, right? Like you
Yeah.
weren't birthed and then became this amazing person. But yeah, I do think that is also just a general generation thing and a cultural thing that is changing, and
Hmm.
definitely something from how I like our peers and how I see other sets run at our level that I think will change, but it's gonna take a while for sure.
Yeah, it's a whole, not to, blame any kind of generation or assume that anyone older than us is capable of harshness on set. It just tends to be more of a trend, of just
Hmm.
kind of like, because I was treated poorly, I'm going to treat others poorly. And hopefully, I think we're graduating, um, away from that. Not to say that I haven't, you know, filmmaking is so stressful. Like slipping up
Yeah.
sometimes and yelling at someone happens because everything is
Hmm.
so high stakes. And if you're, sleep deprived and your brain's crazy, like sometimes things happen, but like on a regular basis, you want to always have that kind of just baseline kindness. No, and also, even if you do get like yelled at sometimes, if I know most of the time this person really cares about me and has my back,
Then
it's
it's
so much
okay.
easier to just be like, oh, they're stressed. Like, rather than be like, oh, this is such a toxic environment, like, hating yourself and going to work every day and hating it. Like, there's such a difference. It changes everything.
Yeah, it totally does. Like you said, getting like slipping up one time is something. Everyone does that in any industry. We're humans and we are fallible people. But whenever it
Yeah.
becomes 5 to 10 times, then it's like, all right, well, this is just your personality. And now you're not going to get any hard work out of me
Yeah,
because
exactly. It's like,
I
I don't want to work for you
that
because you're mean.
yeah, that demotivates everyone. So
Yeah.
I did hear something. Um, I heard someone say like, well, there always has to be someone on set that people hate. And I immediately rejected that because like yes, there needs to be sternness and there needs to be rules that are followed and like you have to get the shot when you got to get the shot and all that kind of stuff like we can't just throw our hands up and just like kind of waltz through the day and take super long to shoot stuff like there are boxes that we need to tick, but I don't think there needs to be a standard of the hated person on set. Like you can enforce rules nicely, I guess.
Yeah. I also think that there's what I guess the middle ground of that almost is like, even if you're going to be someone who's on set and you're going to, be super stern all the time, this I think is falls more into like the stereotypical first AD personality. And I know a lot of amazing first ADs, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like this person runs the set and therefore they can sometimes be not the nicest person. I think it's also so easy and changes a lot if like most of the time maybe you're being super stern and you're yelling. If you can pull someone aside and be like, "Hey, are you okay? Like, how are you doing today? Like, are you feeling okay?" And even just establishing almost this like safe spaces exist. And even though I'm stressed and I'm yelling at you in this aspect, it's not personal, and I'm gonna pull you aside and tell you that I care about you, kind of thing. I think it's so easy, and it will probably end up being this middle ground that we reach, at least in the next couple of years. I would hope so.
Yeah, and explaining in that talk, like, hey, the reason I'm yelling at you is because like we have and obviously this talk can't always be done in the moment because the clock is ticking, but
Hmm.
just explaining like, hey, I'm sorry this happened, but like we had 2 actors drop out 2 hours ago and had to do all this kind of stuff, like blah 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 blah. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do my job. Like you said earlier, just to cap this discussion, if you treat people this is cheesy. It's the golden rule. If you treat people the way you want to be treated, my goodness, are they going to want to work so much harder? And are they going to make better
Yeah.
stuff uh, otherwise? So I'm glad we are both PAs because not that we were terrible people or mean directors before this, but like it's just really good to have this reference, before
Yeah.
we get to where we
Yeah.
want to get. So I'm glad we touched on that because, like you said, you're not really told about that in film school. Like, hey, you're going to be PA and it's probably going to suck a good bit. You're going to get walked over a little bit. So yeah, that's definitely a reality. But you know, I want to talk about Lighthouse Keeping, which is your short that we're filming in like a couple weekends right around the corner.
Yeah.
Uh, uh-oh. um,
Scary.
and we announced, I guess, a couple months ago that Lighthouse Keeping is now part of the Tungsten family, and I'm so excited to be a part of the project now. I'm so glad to, put Tungsten's name on it because the story that it's telling and the way that you run things really exemplifies what I'm trying to do with Tungsten. And so us working together just kind of makes a lot of sense, I think, and it feels really good to be working on it. So, can you explain to the audience what Lighthouse Keeping is about?
Yeah, lighthouse keeping is this experimental surreal narrative about a couple that is staying in a cabin. It's essentially a story about what it feels like to have PTSD, and is supposed to be this super. It's so hard to explain it sometimes because it was written from such an emotion heavy space in my own head. And I've talked about this before to several other people where it's almost putting logic to the script sometimes takes away from the point of the story, I guess. But a lot of, like, the meaning behind lighthouse keeping is essentially to give the audience a glimpse into the emotions that come out and the feelings that are associated with PTSD and what it can feel like in your head when you deal with those things. So it's this story that deals with, the perception of time and of memory and missing memories from, when you have PTSD and kind of these interpersonal relationships that stem from any kind of situation. A lighthouse keeping is specifically about, an abusive relationship, but it also highlights, what it would feel like if you deal with PTSD from, a neglectful childhood or things like that. There's so many things that cause the disorder other than warfare, which is normally the, preconceived idea of what PTSD is, which
Mm-hmm.
100% does exist and I think does reflect the content in lighthouse keeping anyway, of just that kind of being trapped in these emotions all the time, even as your life goes on, outside these walls of your mind, essentially. But yeah, lighthouse keeping is just supposed to be, we're supposed to give people a sort of empathetic glance into what that feels like.
I really respect you as a writer because you write personally and you use the thing like you use your life experiences to kind of dictate the stories that you're telling. I do that as well. Like grief is a large part of my writings. It's certainly a large part of Blueberries, and so I'm always like I always have such a deep respect for people like that because it's difficult to dig in and open yourself up to the world. Obviously it's not a documentary and it's not saying like, hey, this happened to me. Here's my exact experience. But it is it's still very personal and like you're writing about your life. So do you find it easier to write about those personal experiences than otherwise?
I think it's two different beasts, essentially.
Yeah.
There's because I've written roots is, although it comes from, personal beliefs and like things that I question and ponder about and are important to me, it doesn't, I never really had that perspective. I was never like living off the grid in the campsite kind of thing.
Right.
But with lighthouse keeping, it's definitely this kind of deeper dive into what I hope to do for the rest of my life, and which is be super, super honest
Mm-hmm.
about things and bring forth a perspective that people don't, normally talk about or see, which I think is really the basis of what filmmaking is in general, is just kind of getting a glimpse into different perspectives because everyone's perspective is different in the entire world. So getting to see, how someone feels about a certain topic is what film is. And there are certain moments where like I'll wake up in the middle of the night like sweaty and be like, is lighthouse keeping like, am I being too vulnerable? Am I being too honest about like the way I feel? And while, like you said, it's not a biography, it's not like, complete writing of, events that happened to me, that was super important, that I didn't want to, stress myself out in that extent of like
Right.
having to recreate, events or anything like that. But, you're still delving into these emotions that you, at least for me, having been diagnosed with PTSD, it's emotions that I feel on a daily basis.
Hmm.
So kind of having to put that on a platter and give it to an audience and be like, hey, this is the way I feel, is a super terrifying thing. And I think a lot of artists deal with, you know, where is that line of, does it become like masochistic if I'm like taking
Right.
these things that are super, painful and turning them into something else. But also, me personally as a creative, and I think a lot of different artists find that the only way you kind of move past emotions that can maybe be so painful and events that can maybe be so painful is turning them into something that you can look at and be like, well, at least this is beautiful. And at least I
Mm.
made something, I turned this into something that could maybe help someone else. And maybe even if I'm in like horrible pain, because of these events, maybe I can make this art, that changes someone's entire healing process of whatever it is. And I think we probably come from a very similar perspective with lighthouse keeping and blueberries, and kind of taking like grief and translating that into something, that's digestible to other people and hopefully serves as voices for other people feeling those same emotions and going through those same kind of circumstances.
Yeah, totally. And like that just you I love that you said that, and it made me think about, we were just having a tungsten meeting last night, and I was talking about how, we're gearing up pre-production again for Blueberries because we're filming that in June, and so I'm going to revisit the script because a lot of things have changed against then, and I think I'm going to be a better writer now just because we've all had to mature a lot over the past year, so I
Yeah.
definitely want to revisit it. But they were asking if I had gotten the chance to do that yet, they being Joe and Reagan, my fantastic co-producers at Tungsten, and I told them that not this coming week, but the next week, the week this comes out, I'm going to be going home for my grandmother's funeral. And it's the grandmother that Blueberries is inspired by. And I told them, like, I think that will, and I'll be there for a week. And so I told them that will be a really good time for me to revisit it and get back into some rewrites. And Reagan, who is such a nice person and cares about, we all care about each other so deeply, but she was very kind in saying, like, is that, are you going to be okay, pretty much, like, is that going to be too much to handle, your grandmother's funeral and revisiting this script that is about your grandmother? And I basically said, like, well, what better time than to go through that, like, I might as well strap myself in and go to that place, because like that one is a coping mechanism, is a way for me
Hmm.
to deal with this and to get through it. But two, it makes the story all the more better, and then hopefully can have it connect with people more. And I'm sure you've had a similar thing, with telling people about lighthouse keeping. I've told people like at SCAD that I don't know that well. I've talked to professors about it, and I tell them, like, oh, it's inspired by this and this, and it's inspired by my own experiences. I told a professor at SCAD about it, and he immediately started opening up to me about how, like, oh yeah, my mom had Alzheimer's late in her life, and it was really difficult and stuff. And this was a professor that I had spoken with, and we had like a good relationship, but I it really showed me the power of stories connecting with people. And that's a very cliched thing to say, but like, it's so true, and I think those are the best stories, is like when you open yourself up, it's such a vulnerable thing, but then you realize you're not the only one that feels this way, and other people connect to you through that, and it helps the healing process. um, it's just really like interesting to use those personal um, experiences that you probably otherwise wouldn't want to talk about, and then to express them through film and then have other people connect with that is like a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, because with, I don't know, going through anything that's kind of traumatic or upsetting, or any kind of thing that like, upends your life in any sort of way, a lot of the time I've heard people make the argument that, making art out of something dark is almost like um disgraceful to the, you know, like circumstances. But when you think about the ways that humans cope with, you know, different things that they go through, in my opinion, that's the best way
Yeah.
to do that. And also, like, with circumstances like that, anything that has to do with grief, trauma, sadness, the only real way you like kind of move past those things is finding, you know, this sense of community and normalcy of the human experiences, and knowing that, you know, no matter how isolating something may feel, you, as cliche as it is, you're not alone. And that's why movies like that are made, so that
Right.
you can find that sense of community. And when I was even casting Lighthouse Keeping, we put out a casting call on Actors Access, and we got a bunch of replies, and so many of them were like, "Hey, I dealt with this. I was diagnosed with PTSD. No one ever talks about it. Thank you for
Mm,
making this." And there, it was just kind of just like, even if you don't cast me, I'm so glad this is being made and that art like this is being made. Um,
mhm.
and so I don't know, just me as a creative and moving forward, that I think is always just going to be something that I want to do, is kind of create that. You know, so many experiences are universal, but sometimes they feel so
Mhm.
shameful, and it feels shaming in itself to go through grief and trauma, that we just try and act like it's not happening. Um, and the most healing thing possible sometimes is acknowledging that it's happening and finding
Mhm.
people that have also gone through a similar thing. And I think a great outlet for that is film. That's not to say that, like, you know, comedic films aren't important. I think they are.
Right.
But I think, just me personally as an artist, I like to find kind of this deeper meaning of, you know, breaking down almost the human spirit and experience more so than, you know, entertainment. I don't think there's anything wrong with making films for entertainment. I think it's a huge part of, you know, people find passion in that. And I think that's amazing. It just, like, me personally, I would love to make things that, you know, serve as cathartic releases for other people, as along with myself.
And something that I also go through my head about, and I've talked to my producers about, is like specifically, you know, pre-COVID, whenever we were in the final revisions of Blueberries and like, you know, about to go shoot it, I remember telling probably Reagan, you know, like people word spread around SCAD. This is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke on my ass. I'm not trying to, but like people knew what Blueberries was about. People knew
Yeah.
that it was personal and knew that it came from my own experience, and like people connected with it because of that. You know, like, oh my gosh, you're writing about this own personal thing. Like, uh, people liked it for that. But I, as thankful as I am, and I really hope this doesn't sound pretentious because I'm not trying to make it sound that way, but like I remember telling Reagan, like, I want people to like Blueberries because it's good. I don't want people to have to know me and have to know my own personal experience and like all this backstory about what I have been through to appreciate the films. Like in the same way that, you know, it is this process of going through something and extrapolating that through a story, that is important to me. And like I like talking about it and connecting with other filmmakers who do the same thing, but also I want a stranger to be able to watch it and still be impacted by it. So like that is because you can, I was worried personally that I was using the whole personal aspect of it as a crutch of like, well, whether it's good or not, it's personal and people are going to connect with it because of that personal aspect. But I definitely was making sure that I was in check. Like, no, I want someone who has no idea or even cares who I am to watch Blueberries and be impacted for it. So it's a really interesting balancing act all around, you know. But you know, here we are, a couple weeks out from shooting Lighthouse Keeping, and you know, filming an indie film during COVID times is very difficult. I work on the COVID team at SVU, so I see how hard it is to and how much money is spent to keep productions safe at the studio level, but it's also really difficult to do that at our indie level. And you know, there's a bunch of great producers on Lighthouse Keeping, and we are overcoming hurdle after hurdle to make it happen. But I was thinking, whenever I was prepping for this episode, filmmaking is really hard. It's
Yeah.
very difficult and it's very stressful, and you want to pull your hair out. And it's expensive, and all this things. Again, you were talking about how being able to make a film is so privileged, and I don't want to sound like I'm like, oh, woe is me, I'm a filmmaker, because like what a awful thing to say. But I kind of wanted to pitch the question to you: why do we do it? Why do we still go through this process every time, um, and keep trying to solve all these problems?
I think, at least for me, and I think it probably is the universal experience, is just, I think a lot of filmmakers are not necessarily born with it, but have cultivated this burning desire to say something,
Mm.
and that their existence, I think most humans deal with the idea that, you have this life, and if you don't make this kind of impact, then were you ever even here? And it's this thing that is so prevalent in film, more so like if your, films aren't getting traction, and if, it's not being seen by a ton of people, then are you even making a film? Like, it so much of it is this just like super personally connected um, emotions to something that is completely a business, that it's sometimes so hard to navigate. I know I keep doing it because I know I have a lot of things to say, and I
Mm.
think that I don't know, I want to keep saying them for the rest of my life. It's I think there are a lot of people in film, for people who are in it for the right reasons, who have gone through periods in their life where they felt very voiceless, or that their voice has been really stifled in certain circumstances. And I know personally, I've gone through that. I know a lot of women and people of color in film that kind of, regardless of the statistics, keep fighting to be heard. It's kind of just this insane burning desire to not let yourself slip through the cracks, um, and to kind of change the world. I think everyone, maybe not everyone, I think some people don't want to change the world, but I think most people do want to have like a very, very large impact. And I know most of the time I feel that way. I want to, help change the world for the better. Um, and so, at least for me, filmmaking feels like, taking these ideas and concepts that I don't want to die with me, and putting them somewhere so that even when I do pass on, they exist, and that someone can know exactly what I had to say and feel because it still exists. Um, yeah, it's a super like existential meaning behind filmmaking, I think, most of the time. And I think that's why so many artists deal with like these super intense mental health issues a lot of the time, because so much of your existence is tied to, being seen and being acknowledged. And as a filmmaker, like, you want your work to be seen, but because you're the director and you wrote it, that's it's also you as a human being acknowledged and seen. So it's this weird tie to both your career and who you are as a human. um but I don't know, it's I think it's probably different for everyone, but I do think it's more of a universal experience to kind of just want to have that legacy. You don't want to leave this earth without saying everything you have to say. At least for me, in my head, I almost visualize it as like a this huge, like, long run-on sentence that I'm trying to get out before I have to leave. And I think that's what filmmaking is to me. Almost, is just like, here's all these stories, like, here's everything that's in my head, like, I need to leave it here before I go to wherever I'm going, kind of thing.
I could not agree more. I am so glad, truly, I'm so glad you said that, because I think about that all the time. It's like a time capsule, kind of, that you're burying in the sand for future civilizations to find. That's very pretentious, but it's kind of like that. I have thought a lot about how I grew up on my parents' stories, and I think that's where I found my desire to be a storyteller. And I just want to take all of these hilarious and sometimes sad, but always like uplifting stories that are in my family. And I just want to freeze them in time, and I never want to forget them. And I want to share them with everybody. I want to tell everybody about these amazing stories. So it really is a self-preservation in a way. And I couldn't agree more. So I really love that you said that. You talked a lot about how, like, in this interview and in other interviews, that you want to tell stories from about voices that are not often heard by audiences. And I also really respect about the type of crews that you put together, because I know in our personal conversations how important it is to you to have like women-led crews and women-led departments. Can you talk about the importance of that? And I mean, I know lighthouse keeping, I think it's almost every department is women-led. So can you kind of expand on why that is so important to you?
Yeah, I feel like for most of my life, I've mainly seen um, men at the forefront of most things. And I think that, coming from a woman's perspective, that I understand the struggle that other women go through from such obviously an empathetic level, that I know I would want other women to do this for me, to kind of uplift me and put me in positions in which I have, influence. And we've gone through so many decades of it. It seems like we've been living in this time in which, women are starting to have more rights, but it's just because we haven't been alive for very long. The time in which women have really had a voice has not actually, in the grand scheme of things, been long at all. And so it becomes this thing where so much of media beforehand has shaped people's perceptions of reality. And if we're only taking men's voices and that is what shapes our reality, then I think that lends to a lot of the issues that we face in any sort of, sexist issue that we run into in any sort of avenue of society, regardless of whether that's film. And so I think creating stories that, are created by women, by people of color, because it goes, both ways, people that haven't normally really had a voice. Acknowledging my privilege as a white woman, like my voice is heard way more than any person of color or a woman person of color. But still at the same time, it's still not even really like we haven't even gotten, like normalized this a woman's voice at all, really. And I think that it's super important to me that we just change the content that we're seeing and that young people are seeing. I think a lot, it comes from so many personal levels of like when I was younger and we, for like a really weird niche thing I could like attribute this to is almost when everyone, when I was younger, like 12, hated Taylor Swift because we were told by the media and through men's perspective, that she had too many boyfriends. And it was like this whole thing. And women hated her. And it was this whole thing. And we've graduated into this, like level of self awareness of where we're at in our society, that we actually realize that she's a very hard worker and a good person. And like none of that matters. But we were being told through this lens of a super misogynistic viewpoint. And therefore we took it as our reality. And so I think that creating art, even if it's not about women's experiences, if it's told by a woman, changes the perspective and how we see how to treat women. Even when I was at school, I had such a hard time when I would see a lot of really young male directors write female characters that were that had no depth to them and were just a body in their script. And seeing things like that, and knowing that men are given voices more often than women and opportunities to get that content out there, other young men see the way that women are depicted that way and believe that that's, the value women have. Media has such a huge stronghold on how we view things. And I think that having stories, regardless of what they are about, being told through the lens of people that haven't normally gotten respect, and, creating characters that are in turn respected in these stories, changes, young minds to accept that that is the way we actually should be treating people, I think.
Yeah, you hear a lot of criticism that is wrong in my opinion, of like people saying like, well, representation doesn't matter, like why does that matter? And it's always most of the time privileged white guys saying that, and it's like, well, duh, you've always been represented. You've never not been represented. So I totally agree that that representation is really powerful, and how we should like guide the next generation. So as I've said multiple times, we're about to shoot Lighthouse Keeping. It's a 2-day shoot. It's right around the corner. What is your biggest goal for the project? Not necessarily like festivals or like capital success or whatever, but like what, when you're writing this thing and working on it and going through all these problems that we're actively dealing with as filmmakers trying to make it happen, what's the North Star for the project that keeps you going?
Um, on a selfish level, I would say it's almost like taking something that, at least for me right now, still kind of hinders a lot of my daily life and, hinders my emotions. It's almost like when something, really intense happens to you in your life, you're almost like, where do I put this? Like I'm just like walking around in my life and it's just like right next to me and like I never put it down. And so lighthouse keeping for me is like putting it down and being able to kind of put those emotions and not lock them away, because it'll be something I carry with me for the rest of my life, but being able to kind of lift the weight almost and know that something was made out of something that did not feel good. And I think there are a lot of people that I've spoken to who resonate with the story that have a hard time moving on with their life because it's hard to acknowledge that something or things like that can happen to you. And it's not beautiful. It's awful. And it's, there's sometimes no way to turn it into something that means something. And so I want to make something that also resonates with people that feel the same way I do, in the sense that, people who go through situations like that, who have PTSD from, interpersonal situations, most of the time just want to feel like someone understands and someone sees them, because they've gone such a long time not being seen and not being understood in their circumstances. And so if I can emulate feelings that feel cathartic for other people and kind of I want someone to be able to look at it, and hopefully not like resonate it on the same level that I would, because I wouldn't wish it on anyone, kind of thing. But if someone who has been through something like that can look at it and be like, yeah, I feel seen, I feel heard, this is cathartic, like I'm not alone, this has happened, like unfortunately, but that feeling of, community, it's so important, that feeling of having people, a support system. And so many people don't get it after grief and trauma of any kind. And if I can create an art that serves as proof of support from my end, then I think it will have achieved its goal in that sense.
Well, Nicole, it has been truly a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad to be a small part in lighthouse keeping. I just am so glad that Tungsten is able to be a part of it and able to just to assist making it happen, because I think it's a story that needs to be told. And my goodness, have you proved yourself as a filmmaker with roots? And you have done amazing things already, and I can't wait to see the amazing things you do in a couple of weeks when we film it. And I wish I could be there. I'm sad I can't be on set, but I know it'll be amazing. And I've just absolutely loved picking your brain about all this stuff, and would love to have you back on in a couple years to see what other bigger and more amazing things that you're making. So it's really been a pleasure, and I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you. I'm really excited to make this. Thank you for jumping on light housekeeping. Also, my AirPods died, so if the audio sounds weird, that's what's going on. Just as a backstory with that. But thank you for jumping on light housekeeping. Obviously, I have so much respect for you as a creative, because I think that we have very, very similar ideals in terms of the world we want to see, and similar experiences, I think, in what we've gone through so far with the industry. And so I have the utmost respect for you and what you're doing, and will continue to support Tungsten for the rest of my life, because I think it's amazing. So it is a pleasure to be on this podcast.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you for saying that. And audience, thank you for tuning in. If you listen to the audio only version of this podcast, you should head over to our YouTube channel and check out the video version. We've thrown up some BTS footage from Roots, some lighthouse keeping concept stuff, and a bunch of other fantastic things that you can experience if you're listening to the audio only version. We've been putting a lot of effort into this podcast, and I'm really proud of what we've been making, and I'm really enjoying the video process of it. And we're making like these promo clips and everything. So it's been a lot of fun, and we've got a lot more exciting things coming up. I'm actually filming Monday, 2 days after this recording. I'm filming the announcement for something that is kind of big. So keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for that. But again, Nicole, thank you so much. Everyone, links to Nicole's work and her social medias and all that fantastic stuff is in the description of this episode. Be sure to go check it out. Watch Roots, and stay up to date on lighthouse keeping stuff, because it's going to be good. And the next episode comes out a week from today, Monday at 9 a.m. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.